Hi, I'm Harriet Frew, eating disorder therapist, teacher and podcaster, and you're about to start healing from your eating disorder and transforming your life and your relationship with food and body. I've worked in NHS and private practice supporting clients for 20 years, and I believe that recovery is possible for you. This podcast dives into expert interviews, evidence-based psychological approaches, and anecdotal tips from the therapy room from my years of experience. If you're wanting to heal your relationship with food, feel confident in your body, develop self-love and self-acceptance, and create a life of freedom and meaning, then this podcast is for you. Thank you for being here.
Today I have two guests on the show, and I'm talking to Katie Shepherd and Lara Paciorek from Food Explorers, based out of Connecticut and Massachusetts, USA. Katie founded Food Explorers in January 2018 after leaving a job as a retail dietitian with no backup plan. While that job wasn't the right fit, Katie discovered the joys of children's cooking classes and how it combined her love of food and working with children. Food Explorers started as a little side dream and has grown into a full-time, ever-growing company with multiple instructors, over 100 summer camps, and an immeasurable number of community partners, schools, and recreation departments that as a whole make the Food Explorers mission possible. So after welcoming her baby boy Jack in July of 2021 and then embarking on the journey of baby-led weaning and introducing foods and flavours, Katie dove even deeper into how our relationship with food can impact us from childhood. So working together then with Lara, now the assistant director in the company, but previously teaching the cooking skills, the mission of Food Neutrality was introduced to their classes. So they hope to always inspire kids to explore new foods and flavours, teach them valuable cooking skills, and more importantly, to show children that food is meant to be enjoyed, not feared. Exploring food encourages children to learn through sensory experiences, hands-on activities, and working together to create delicious results. Children will have the freedom to explore thanks to their unique food-neutral approach to teaching about food. So they have a massive focus on the skills that kids are learning in classes and creating a safe and comfortable environment for them to try new foods and flavours. So they don't use any kind of healthy versus unhealthy language in their classes. And actually, they don't say anything at all around labelling foods. They present the foods and the recipe they'll be making, and the children can either choose to taste it or not. It's completely up to them. And at Food Explorers, they also recognise how adults have such an impact on young minds with the way they talk about food and bodies. So if we could create a neutral environment around food for children to feel comfortable, not shamed or guilted, then hopefully can really show them that foods have no moral value. Food can actually and is actually really fun. So in the episode today, Katie and Lara talk about Food Explorers, how it came about, how they work, and their passion and mission behind educating young people. It's a very inspiring business model that has really put a lot of thought and consideration at the centre of teaching about relationship with food and body for young people, whilst also being very supportive of parents in the process. I know you're going to really enjoy this conversation. Let's get to it. So hello, Katie and Lara. Welcome to the Eating Disorder Therapist podcast. So can I get you firstly both to introduce yourselves? And Katie, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thanks for having us. My name's Katie. I'm originally from England, but I currently live in Connecticut in the US. I'm a registered dietitian and I'm the owner of Food Explorers, which is a kids cooking class company, but we have kind of a unique twist on our food messaging, which is what we were going to kind of chat with Harriet about today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. And Lara?
Hi, my name is Lara. I am the assistant director at Food Explorers. I'm also located in Connecticut with Katie, and I have a background in early childhood education as well as nutrition and wellness. And I joined Katie a few years ago at Food Explorers and helping to expand the mission.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, well, thank you both. So, Katie, can I ask you, what is Food Explorers and how did it come about?
Yeah, I think it's been 6 years now. I started it because I left a job that was really bad. But the one positive that came from it was that I discovered that I really loved teaching kids cooking classes. So the way that like libraries and kids classes are set up in the US, means that there's funding to bring in like outside people to teach classes. And so once I realized that, it kind of became a little business idea, which started off really slow. It was just me. And I think in my first 6 months, I did like 6 classes. But over the last like 6 years, even through COVID, it's grown. We did virtual classes when COVID hit and like schools shut down. Lara joined, things got really big. And then I don't know how many classes we do in a given week, Lara, but like it's probably at least 30.
I would say it's close to 15 in the school year, probably. And over the summer is a completely different ball game because we're teaching full week summer camps. And so the summer camp is super busy season, which just ended, but after school is becoming just as busy in the recent years.
Yeah. Summer camp, I don't remember ever going to like summer camp when I lived in England, and like summers are shorter in England for schools. But in America, the kids get 10 weeks. And summer camps, like, you know, parents need somewhere to send their kids for the week. And like summer is long, like it needs to be broken up. So summer camps are this huge, huge thing for us over here.
Oh, yeah, no, I actually worked on a summer camp in Connecticut, actually, near New Milford. Yeah.
Oh, I think we remember chatting about that. What was it?
It's called Bucks Rock. I mean, it sounds an English person saying very American.
Yeah.
Bucks Rock. It was amazing though. Yeah. Have you heard of it?
No, I don't live anywhere near there.
Sure. Yeah. What about you, Lara? Have you heard of Bucks Rock?
I have not, but it is not a camp title that would surprise me because there's always something interesting happening every summer. And sometimes I see other camp offerings and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's an idea I had never considered. But I bet you there's a bunch of kids that are super interested in that.
Goodness. Well, as a sideline, it was a very artsy kind of creative camp. So they might be interested in Food Explorers stuff as well. I don't know. I think they're still going.
People do all kinds of things here. Like when we do programs at libraries over the summer, we're obviously doing cooking, but there are people that bring like llamas and farm animals to the library, you know, magic shows, music, science, like there's all kinds of things that happen.
Wow, no, that sounds amazing. So, Lara, can I ask you a bit about the kind of the ethos of Food Explorers? So, from what I understand, you're really supporting children and adults as well to have like a healthy relationship with food, like move away from diet culture, food neutrality. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's a really important part of our mission right now to empower kids to learn about food and cooking, but also to practice food neutrality, which I think is something that makes us a little different than other potential cooking classes for all ages. And like you said, we teach all ages. The majority of the kids that we teach are going to be kind of elementary, middle school age, but we also teach, preschool classes, and we even teach like adult classes and some like classes at senior centers. So we really have kind of a widespread audience. And when we're teaching our classes, things that make us different is there is never any pressure to try food or, take one bite of something. We are always practicing food neutrality, which to us means there is no pressure for food and all foods have a place. And we also don't do any of the, quote unquote traditional or, kind of old school nutrition teaching kind of messaging. So we're not talking about added sugars. We're not talking about fiber. We're not even discussing things like My Plate, which is very popular for like teaching in schools here in the US. So we're just focusing on skills. So we're focusing on food safety and knife skills and how do we measure ingredients and what are maybe like the food science principles in a recipe, right? Like why is something binding together or emulsifying, or why does whipped cream whip? We're focusing on those life skills for kids so that they can, number one, just enjoy the process of making food and gain skills and feel confident with that, feel confident in the kitchen. And then if they try a new food later, great. If they don't, maybe they will another day. We know that repeat exposures are important for anybody to try new foods, especially children. But that's not the goal. The goal is to, share these basic skills and then even advanced skills, because we do a lot with kids. They do everything from like homemade pies, pastries, cakes, doughs, down to more simple techniques. So our mission, although, when Food Explorers started, I'm sure Katie can talk to this a little bit, before I joined, right? We did kind of follow more of a traditional model of discussing like, sugars and discussing my plate and food groups. But in recent years, we've really shifted away from that with a lot of like discussion between Katie and myself, and really thinking about how can we provide an environment that is going to be fun, it's going to be safe, and it's going to be positive. No kid is going to leave feeling like they were pressured or nervous around food items.
When we train new instructors as well, we often are telling them that it's more about not saying anything about the food rather than saying much. This food neutral approach is very much like underlying. We're not going into these classes being like, hey, we're, an anti-diet culture, food neutral class. We're just not saying anything. Sometimes we're not using this like healthy, unhealthy, good, bad, whatever ways you can think of to categorize foods. We're not saying any of that language. So sometimes when we're trying to get the message across to new instructors of like, how do you teach that in a class? It's almost like you're just removing all of that language. And then you're just getting back to what Lara was saying, which is like the skills and learning about the food itself, and just taking away all of the noise that comes with the way that we talk about food.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually, because I'm thinking about when I support clients sometimes around like body neutrality as well. So much of that is about not focusing on the body as much, like the body becoming much more in the background. So it sounds like quite similar in a way. Like it's almost like, yeah, you're taking away all the judgment, aren't you? Like the good, bad, just much more, just being much more neutral and being much more kind of creative and exploratory with food rather than,
We can often tell when kids are in class if they come from an environment at home that is maybe a bit more judgmental or like high pressure to try foods or finish the plate, or like you can just feel from a kid when there's stress around food. And sometimes like when we just say like, you don't have to eat this, you can see them like relax, because they're so worried that I had a kid cry because he didn't want to eat what we were making because it had red pepper in it. And I was just like, you can pick it out. And he was like, really? And then he ate it. So sometimes, not every child has the benefit of having like a food neutral environment at home. So if they're with us for whatever it is, an hour a week, a few hours a week, we want to give them that environment that makes them feel comfortable and safe to try or to not try anything.
Yeah, that sounds great. So Katie, can you talk a bit about how Food Explorers transitioned a bit? Like it sounds like in the earlier days, maybe your focus was slightly different.
Yeah, I would say for the first maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, I was doing like activities on added sugar and things like my plate and focusing on food groups. I don't think we ever did anything about calories, but I definitely was more like nutrition education focused, because I kind of felt like I had to. Like I'm a dietitian, I was teaching food and cooking and like healthy cooking. But then I had my baby. I had Jack, and that's when I was like reading about, baby-led weaning and like letting the child take the lead, and how our relationships with food develop from such a young age. And that's when Lara joined as well. And I think Lara and I would just have these really like in-depth conversations about how we grew up with food, how we want our kids to grow up with food and the way they're thinking about it, and maybe actually how damaging some of these ways we talk about food can be to a child and the way they grow up around food. So we just kind of slowly took away all of that more traditional nutrition education stuff. And sometimes we've had questions, why don't you do this anymore? Why aren't you focusing on just healthy cooking? Or, why aren't you doing, just kids' food? And it's kind of like, well, what is kids' food? What is healthy food? Because to somebody it's going to mean one thing and to somebody else it's going to mean something else. So sometimes it can take people a little bit to wrap their heads around with the way we're doing it, but we have a really positive reception of it, I would say.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I'm kind of so with you that I think once we have our own children, it
Yeah.
changes everything, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
we have these kind of ideas about things, and then you have your own child, and then it's like, oh my goodness, yeah, there's a whole new different way of looking at things. And yeah. But I mean, I think just good for you because it's quite brave, isn't it? I think to start something and then transition and shift it. And it sounds like there's a lot of kind of thought and talking through, a lot of consideration put into what you're doing, which I guess just makes it even more valuable really today.
Yeah, we definitely had some good good conversations, Lara and I, about this, and really kind of dug deep of like why we felt this was important and like how we would go about doing it. Like, does it mean we can't do any nutrition education? Like, what language are we using in class? Like, what are we okay with instructors saying or not saying? It can be difficult to teach to our new instructors, especially if they grew up in like a very diet culture influenced house. Like you really do sometimes have to switch the way your brain thinks about things, which can be a challenge.
I think something really encouraging that Katie and I have seen, even just in honestly like the past 2 years, when we hire new instructors, especially over the summer, there are a lot of college students, right? They're still in college or they're like recent grads. And something super refreshing that I've found is when we are interviewing them and we kind of open ended kind of pose to them this question of food neutrality because we want to see where they're currently at personally and professionally with this idea. It has not surprised a lot of people in recent years. I would say that if I went further back, I think it would be a little more shocking and people wouldn't be quite as aware. But even like if I think back to the summer instructors we just hired for this past summer, all of their interviews, everybody was pretty familiar with what that term might mean or felt very strongly and passionately about like conveying that message. That was really exciting to kind of see this shift because it hasn't even been that long, really, if you look at it in the big picture, that Katie and I have been in school and there was not that conversation in any of our classes, right? So to see these new students come up that are going to be teaching for us, yes, we train them in exactly what we do, but for them to already have kind of that base groundwork there and feeling really passionately about the same message as we do is really wonderful because in all of the discussion we've had and in all of the thought we've put behind our messaging in our classes, we realized we have such a huge responsibility, right, to help be, even if it's a small portion of a child's experience with food, just to help shape that relationship and make it a positive one. That's a huge responsibility. And to find the right people to also then help with our classes and that message has actually become easier, I think, over recent years. There's still some training, there's still some learning, but just, I don't know, I've been very excited to see younger, right, soon to be dietitians or soon to be nutrition professionals very embracing of this idea.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just think Gen Z, I love that generation and just that I just think they're so sort of socially evolved and
agreed.
open.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously they have to contend with like so much more of like the social media and negative influences as well. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense actually. But it is really encouraging, isn't it? I just think how quickly things are shifting, actually. There's a lot more work to do, but Gen Z, definitely very, very open-minded. Yeah, you're seeing that in your kind of new instructors.
Yeah, it's nice to have people come in that think that way already because kids, like, they listen to everything that's said at home, whether you think they're listening or not. If you're, a mum or a dad or an aunt or an uncle and you say something about weight loss or body image or food, they pick up on it and they say those things in our classes. Like, I thought we couldn't have this because of this, or my mum said that I can't have anything with sugar in it, but she signed you up for a cupcake class. And it's like, well, like, I kind of think you're in the wrong place then, but she signed you up for this. And, things about paleo diets I've had, and like, a child that was only allowed low carb bread. They come out with things that can take you by surprise sometimes. And you really have to like take a second before you say anything. And maybe you don't say anything. We're not going to like fix what's going on at home. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not going to be like, well, your mum is wrong. It's just like, well, this is how we're doing things in this class today. But yeah, you can definitely tell when things with food at home are a little different.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a great point. I think that before 10 years old, we're like little sponges, aren't we? And we just absorb whatever we grow up with is our normal.
Yeah.
So Lara, could you talk us through a sort of typical class? Because I believe you do a lot of the kind of cooking and stuff with the children.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got my start as a cooking instructor with Food Explorers a few years ago, and just have slowly shifted more to admin in my role, which I love all of it. But a typical class, for instance, like after school or for library programs, those are 1 hour long, which when you initially say an hour, it feels like a long time. But when you're cooking with kids, it goes by very fast. So we will, meet a new group of kids. There's obviously some like icebreaker and trying to get to know them, because we are the single instructor with that group of kids. And then our recipes can be so varied. You could be making, classes that you're only doing chocolates or desserts. Other classes, you're making fresh pasta, you're making salads. So our instructors have to have a really good base knowledge of just how you might kind of fix a recipe on the fly, right? If something is measured incorrectly, or, something drops on the ground. But the kids do everything, essentially, aside from working with, heat, like, our instructors will be the ones touching the hot plate or touching, the oven. But the kids do all of the measuring, they do all of the mixing, they do any of the chopping. We have kids safe knives and cutting boards, and then they are, supervised when using things like an electric mixer, right? So they will make the recipe, which usually involves multiple components. One of the recipes this fall we're doing is a sweet potato pie with marshmallow whipped cream, right? So they're making their sweet potato pie base. They're making graham cracker crusts in little mini foil pans, so they're individual pies. And then they're making marshmallow whipped cream, like 3 kind of big steps, lots of components happening. And after they've made their wonderful recipe, it's completed, there's always cleanup involved. That's part of our classes. Kids don't just get to make the food and eat. We also all take care of our space, and we clean dishes. Washing dishes is actually one of the most popular jobs in our classes. Kids will love to do that, which is hilarious, because all of the parents will say they would never do that at home. And I believe it, right? But they have a blast. So we all clean up, and then we get time to enjoy that food item. Sometimes there's extra time, and we will play games. Like we have a bingo game that's all guessing types of foods based on riddles. So sometimes we'll play that, but it's really focused on the recipe most of the time, and then getting to enjoy that recipe if they so choose. Some kids will decide to bring home the recipe and share with their parents, or maybe eat at home later. Or maybe it's just not their favorite and they want to bring it home to, sister, brother, whoever it is. And that's fine. But the focus on all of the skills involved in the recipe, right? And what's happening in that recipe, that's what we're really working on, as well as cleanup, because that's an important part. So that 1 hour, it goes by super fast. I think our new instructors, that's the biggest thing that they will say is like time management is something they, thought about, but also didn't expect to go by so quickly. So our instructors, they are moving quickly, and they are checking times, especially if there's anything that they have to batch bake. They have to batch bake, donuts or something like that. And over the summer, recipes are more involved, even though we have half-day classes. So like there is more recipes, more time, they are more involved, and they usually include like a lot of homemade doughs. And so things can take a while. Fresh homemade pasta with 12 children can be quite the feat to accomplish. And the kids get so great, though, at all of those skills over like a week or over a multi-week session. So you'll see them kind of start off, maybe not have a ton of skill or very basic kind of knowledge. And then towards the end of their program, they're like little chefs, they're pros.
Oh, amazing. I think I need to come on one of your courses.
We make some really tasty stuff.
Yeah, no, amazing. I can imagine the time will just fly by. I just think about like cooking actually when my children were younger. Yeah, I mean, I think a medal to everyone who's doing that very enjoyable but quite challenging task.
Yes. Yes.
So Katie, do you run classes as well for for adults if they're wanting to like support their children a bit with their relationship with food and cooking?
We tried doing some like the more seminar-based classes through like community, organizations and libraries with like the purpose of kind of explaining, your relationship with food and being food neutral. And there were definitely people interested, but because there was no cooking in it, people were not as interested as maybe we had hoped. And I think because we are like such an underlying message that parents are maybe not even aware that that's something that we do. We obviously put it on the website, we put it in our emails, but I think it's still, like I said, something that people have to like wrap their heads around. And when I was doing some of those like seminars about it, it was mostly kind of the older generations that would come because I think it was just such an interesting like idea to them that they were like, what does this even mean? So I'm not really sure how we would do it where we had parents of like young kids, because like I said, we're not going into classes saying we're a food neutral, like anti-diet class, because we're not saying those things. But we would love if parents like were a bit more proactive about kind of doing those things at home as well. But I'm not sure if we know how to do that yet.
Sure. Well, it sounds like you're kind of on an evolving journey, I guess, aren't you, with the work you're doing?
Yes. Yeah. It's such a like nuanced, niched way of thinking that I think if you are really embedded in like the way that we now culturally think about food, that the way we're trying to explain things is just really difficult to think about.
Time for a short advertisement break. Are you a counsellor, dietitian, therapist, nutritionist, personal trainer, or other mental health professional? Are you seeing increasing numbers of your clients struggling with eating disorders and disordered eating? And are you keen to learn skills and strategies and build confidence in working with your clients who struggle with these issues? We know that increasing numbers of people are struggling with eating disorders, and we know that 85% of people with eating disorders are not underweight, and this means that many eating disorder symptoms are hidden. The Good Childhood Report in 2021 highlights appearance as a leading cause of unhappiness among young people and indicates that appearance concerns are increasing year upon year. So join my Eating Disorders Training Day on Zoom, face-to-face, or self-paced online. It will give you a really good understanding about the different types of eating disorders, including anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and OSFED, with an introduction to RFED and neurodiversity and eating disorders. You'll explore typical causes of eating disorders and understand how to create a psychological formulation for your client, and this will be brought to you by relating to client examples. I will take you through then my specific knowledge, skills, and techniques, which can be used when supporting clients with eating disorders. You will get a full comprehensive training manual and access to the recording of the training afterwards and a full online version of the course. If you want to sign up, please go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk, and you might also be interested in my body image training for professionals too.
But it sounds like you're really going for a more like nuanced approach, which I think is actually very healthy, because I think in the world today, things become very like kind of like diet culture or extreme wellness, or I don't know, like I think there's always nuance in things, and it kind of is a lot more kind of subtle and gentle, isn't it, really, rather than having to get always like really militant about things.
Yeah, and I had a phone call that I think I called Lara after because I was like so shocked. I had a parent call me directly and ask about our classes, and she specifically asked if we were teaching about healthy eating. And I said no, and I was expecting her to be kind of like disappointed. But actually, she was like, oh, like, thank goodness. I've been trying to find somewhere that I can send my kids to learn about food and cooking that isn't like, diet culture based. And I kind of asked why. And so she had twin girls in sixth grade, which, how old are you in sixth grade, Laura? 12?
I think so.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you're asking somebody who is homeschooled, so I don't have a great I don't have a great reference for that. We're
so however, so 11 or 12. So they were 11 or 12, and in their like food health class, the teacher was teaching them about food, and instead of the usual ways that you hear about food being categorized, like the good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, this teacher was teaching them about hero and villain foods, which is like really taking it to like the next level. Middle school kids maybe have a little bit more like ability to not see black and white. But if you said that to elementary school kids, like say their favorite food was a donut, and then this teacher told them that that's a villain food, that can be really confusing. And there's things that, peanut butter, peanut allergies is a huge thing over here, especially. So for a child that's anaphylactically allergic to peanuts, peanuts and peanut butter are a villain food, you could say. But peanuts and peanut butter nutritionally would probably make it on the hero list for most people. It's high in fat, it's high in protein, it's considered to be like a traditionally quote unquote healthy food. But if you're teaching it in just these two categories, how is a child who is allergic to peanuts supposed to like mentally think that, how are they supposed to figure that out? So just giving these two options for how we can think about food is just so not helpful.
I think like the hero and villain example, which Katie did call me immediately after. She's like, "You're never going to believe this phone call I had. I thought it was going to turn out like, the mom was disappointed, but she wasn't. She was so happy." But when I heard that example, I just thought about like morality, right? Like heroes and villains are introduced to children as a way to discuss, morality a lot of the time, right? Good and bad. And to then have that put onto foods, it's just absolutely absurd to me. And it breaks my heart because, like Katie said, there's so many examples for when you could say that a, in quote, villain food is really not a villain food, and vice versa. Every time I hear an example like that, I get further and further happy about our mission and excited about how to spread that. And I think, we talked about how do we get that message out to adults and parents? And we've kind of played around with how can we do that, right? Do we do seminar classes? Do we do other things? And I think one of the hardest parts is, there's usually some defensiveness.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily from, a bad place. There's, people who have grown up, right, as part of the Clean Plate Club, and their parents forced them to finish their meal. And maybe there was multiple reasons why that happened, right? Generations ago, your family didn't have a lot of food. And so then wasting food was really, terrible. And so it's kind of like, how do we unpack that in a way that doesn't have people immediately on the defense, right? Like have them feel open enough to discuss that conversation. I think one of the ways Katie and I have like chatted about it too is like maybe in the future we are offering some kind of like parent and child class together where we maybe can kind of spread this a little bit further. But it is really hard to sometimes have an open discussion without it feeling like us telling parents, you're doing this wrong. You're doing this poorly. And no parent wants to hear that. Every parent wants the best for their child. So it's always trying to find a way to have our, mission, make sure we're executing that well. And then how do we balance that with, having parents being able to understand and accept, but also, not feel like they are, defensive.
Mm-hmm. Which maybe shouldn't be such a bad thing. Because, maybe sometimes it does need a bit of shock value. Like if you showed like the amount of cases of eating disorders that have risen over the last like decades, that's
true.
Not for no reason. And like Harriet said, like her social media with Gen Zs, like that's got such a huge impact as well that sometimes, maybe we're being too nice about it. You can have your own views about food, but like, let's just take a second and step back and think about how that's going to impact your 5-year-old daughter, 15 years from now when she's a young adult by herself trying to make her own food and has all of these, mental battles about it every day. So yeah, I mean, and Lara and I always have, sometimes it's like we have these good cop, bad cop conversations where like, one of us wants to push something and one of us is like, I don't know how you feel about that. But we don't, like Lara said, we don't want to upset parents, we don't want to get them on the defensive, but it's like also this is a huge issue and it's impacting us for our whole lives. And yes, you may not see it in your 5-year-old now, but you may see it when she's 20, when she's figuring out all of these things about food and her body. And you have to kind of, I don't know what the best way of doing it is.
I think every single person, if you ask them to answer honestly and truly, will have some amount of an experience around food that did not make them feel good. And some people will have more examples than others. And I think, again, going back to when we hire new instructors, sometimes we don't ask this directly, of course, but like sometimes it comes out that, they will say, oh my gosh, I feel so passionately about this because, and then they share something from their personal life, right? Like the way they grew up, somebody they knew, them themselves. And Katie and I think we've both shared our own experiences with each other too. And we realized, like, yes, I think every single person could have been impacted by, diet culture messaging, something their parents did, or didn't say, either way. But since we all have such shared experiences around that, it does mean that, what we're doing is important and we need to continue that on and finding that balance. Like Katie said, how do we make sure that we are doing what we need to do to hopefully provide a better environment for the children?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think it is difficult, isn't it, to strike that fine balance? Because I think as parents, sometimes, like you're saying, like every parent wants the best for their child, don't they? And I think sometimes, we can be defensive as parents as well, because we kind of feel like, oh my God, this is another thing that I've got to try and
yes.
get right. And and particularly when you're getting quite conflicting messages, maybe from the government or from school, or you can feel like, oh my goodness, I just don't know what to do to win. But it sounds like you're very sort of, I just really like the way that you guys are approaching the business, really. It's sort of very sort of thought through and considerate, isn't it? And, just really trying to kind of engage people, I guess. And that's a sort of drip process, isn't it, really? We can't be too perhaps evangelical about these things sometimes, even when we're massively passionate ourselves. But also, like you say, you don't want to just be too passive either, in a way. It's a difficult thing to strike the balance.
Yeah, it is. And it's also because, registered dietitians all have the same schooling, but everyone also seems to have their own kind of unique approach to food as well. And so, that can be difficult for people as well. There's some dietitians like me and like who are into this kind of more food neutral approach. And there are other dietitians that are really strict and focused on, whatever specific diet it is that they believe in. So there can be a lot of mixed messaging that people have to kind of decide what they think fits them. But I think for us, and we know that food impacts us for much longer than just the short term. If you're trying to lose weight, something short term, that's going to impact you for just a little bit. But what we're thinking of is, like we said, like years down the line, when we're older and all of these things are going to come back to us. So it can be definitely difficult for people to kind of figure out from all the messaging out there what is right for them.
Yeah, they're very true. So Lara, I'm just wondering, is there anything that you would like to kind of add in terms of any kind of final messages about Food Explorers, anything perhaps we haven't talked about within the business that the listeners may be interested in?
Oh gosh.
Pressure.
That's a big question to take down, right? So I think that with everything we're doing with children's cooking classes and this food neutral approach, I wish there was more of it. And if anybody's interested in this information and how, we are able to engage, children in these classes and what we're doing, they should definitely connect with us, because we love to like chat with people and to get more ideas and also just spread the word on what we are up to. So certainly love any collaboration and any interest there is. We love to chat with people on that. I think we've covered a lot of all of the awesome things that we do. And I think I have one example of the positive impact that I would love to share from our classes. A couple years ago, when I was still teaching full time before I had my baby, I was teaching multiple sessions of after school classes. So, multi-week classes, you meet with a group of kids once a week, right? And I went back to that location with different themes and different classes over, a whole year. And I had a little boy in my class who, the very first day I had him there, he is a little quiet, but I'm very happy to participate, didn't eat what he made. Totally fine, right? We don't force anybody to eat the food. They don't have to lick it. They don't have to smell it. They really don't have to eat it at all. He came back, right? For the rest of the 3 weeks we were together, didn't eat a single thing. He came back for more classes and more classes. I think I must have had this child in at least 12 classes, right? So at least 12 weeks I saw him. And he did not eat a single food. But every day that I was with him, he left smiling and like beaming with pride to show his mom what he made. And he kept coming back, right? He didn't just take one class and not come back. He took multiple types of classes. He took sweets and savories and like lots of different things he made, didn't eat a single thing. And for me, it's one of the many examples we have, but it really illustrates how important it is, what we're doing to not pressure kids to eat. Because I think if that very first class I had forced and said, you have to try one bite, just take one no thank you bite or whatever, right? The messaging had been, but if I had forced that child to try something, I don't think I would have seen him again, right? And to have instances like that, and we have plenty of other examples, but that one really, hits home for me because it feels like a perfect example of how that no pressure environment, enjoying the, process of making food, the things that we're doing can really have a positive impact because that kid left knowing how to make all types of foods and having all of those skills and having a positive experience. So yeah, I think that's an example I love to share because it really makes me think every day that I love what I'm doing and I love what Food Explorers is doing in order to, empower children and make them feel safe and have a great experience.
Oh, lovely. Thank you for sharing that. So, Katie, can I ask you, just for the listeners, where can people find you? How can they get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, our website is food-explorers.com. We're on Instagram too, which is Food Explorers CT for Connecticut. We post like some recipes on there and some videos of, the types of things that we do in classes. But like Lara said, if anybody wanted to reach out and like message us, we're always happy to like chat about what we do and how we do things. If anybody had like an idea for a recipe for us to do in classes, that's always appreciated because I'm trying to think about recipes for the number of classes that we do sometimes gets difficult. So, and I've connected with a few people in the UK that do kids cooking classes, which is really cool. So there's so many people out there teaching kids cooking classes, not necessarily with the same messaging, but it is cool to know that there are so many people out there that like love to teach kids how to cook.
Yeah, no, amazing. So at the moment, I guess you need to live in Connecticut or close by to Connecticut to come to your classes. That's right.
Yes, we do a little bit in Massachusetts, like kind of on the border a little bit. But yeah, we're pretty much just based in Massachusetts. When we were doing virtual classes during COVID, we were like nationwide. We got into different states and we were doing classes everywhere, which was really cool. But people are not interested in doing things on Zoom anymore.
Sure, yeah.
A little bit of Zoom burnout.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. It makes sense. Okay, no, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on the podcast. It's been just really, really interesting and inspiring conversation. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. Do go and check out all of Food Explorers' details in the show notes. If you're not following me already on Instagram, do seek me out, the Eating Disorder Therapist _. For further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. I've also recently started writing on Substack. If you want to seek me out, search for the Eating Disorder Therapist. If you enjoy this podcast, I would be so grateful if you'd follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.